Picture this for a second. A tennis tournament stacked with legends. Naomi Osaka on one court, Venus Williams on another, Olympic gold medalists warming up just a few steps away. And yet none of them are the reason people are calling the box office. None of them are the name being whispered in hallways, typed into search bars, and shouted from the stands. That honor belongs to a 21-year-old who had never even played a single match in Washington, D.C. before this tournament. And by the time she walked off the court after her opening win, the entire event had quietly turned into her personal stage. So let's rewind and figure out how a rising star from a country that most tennis insiders barely mentioned 5 years ago suddenly became the single biggest storyline at an event worth over $1.5 million in prize money. Because the answer is a lot bigger than a scoreboard. And honestly, it says more about what sports fandom is turning into in this decade than it does about tennis rankings. So buckle in, because this is one of those stories that starts with a single match and ends up somewhere nobody expected. It was late July, the kind of sticky Washington summer evening where the air practically clings to your skin, and Rock Creek Park was buzzing away that longtime tournament staff say they had genuinely never experienced before. Not for this event anyway. And the reason wasn't a marquee showdown between two former champions. It was a young Filipino player named Alex Eala walking out to face an Olympic medalist. Most fans expected to steamroll her, and instead of a quiet formality, what unfolded was a genuine upset, the kind that makes a room go silent for a second before it erupts. And when it was over, when Eala had actually taken down her more decorated opponent, something shifted in the atmosphere that had nothing to do with rankings or seedings, because what happened next in the press room is a part almost nobody outside tennis circles knows about. The tournament's chairman, a man who has run this event for years and has watched countless big names come through, sat down with reporters and dropped a number that made jaws drop. He said that over the past month, the ticketing office had been fielding an avalanche of inquiries, and when they tried to figure out what the common thread was, it turned out that the overwhelming majority, something like 80% or more, all boiled down to one single question. When is Eala playing? And here's the detail that makes it even wilder. He didn't sound like he was exaggerating for effect. He sounded almost stunned himself, admitting that his own staff suspected the real number was even higher, but were hesitant to say it out loud because it sounded too extreme to be believed. So just sit with that for a second. In a tournament packed with Grand Slam winners and Olympic champions, for out of every 5 people calling and weren't asking about them, they were asking about a player who, in terms of trophies and titles, was still very much on the way up, and that gap between her competitive resume and her drawing power is exactly where the story gets interesting, because it means something other than winning was pulling people through the gates, and that something turned out to be identity, community, and a kind of hometown pride that had been building quietly for years before it finally exploded onto the biggest stage this tournament had ever seen. Now, if you think this was some overnight surprise for people running the event, think again. Because according to the chairman, his team had actually clocked this rising wave months earlier, back in early spring, long before Washington was even on the radar for most casual fans. He described it almost like scouting a storm system, watching the early signs build on the horizon, and realizing they needed to act before it made landfall. So the tournament made a deliberate push to bring her into their lineup, not because of her ranking alone, but because they sense a cultural moment forming. And by the time she actually showed up in D.C., that instinct had paid off in a way even they probably underestimated. Because what greeted her wasn't just curious fans. It was an entire diaspora community mobilizing. People driving in from other states. Families who had never set foot at a professional tennis match before suddenly buying tickets just to be in the building, and flags. An overwhelming, unmistakable wave of Philippine flags filling entire sections of stands. Something this venue had reportedly never witnessed at this scale. And if you're wondering why a single athlete could pull that kind of response, you have to understand what representation means to a community that has often felt like it was watching sports from the outside looking in. Tennis in particular has historically been dominated by a fairly narrow set of countries and backgrounds at the very top level. So when a young woman from a modest neighborhood suddenly starts beating Olympic champions on the international stage, it isn't just a personal victory. It becomes a symbol. It becomes proof that the door isn't locked after all. And that's precisely the emotional current that was running through every one of those flag-waving fans in Rock Creek Park that week. What made this even more compelling is how Eala herself talked about it afterward, because instead of brushing off the significance or playing it purely as a tennis achievement, She leaned directly into what it meant, telling reporters that she felt genuinely privileged to carry her flag and represent everything that comes with it. And she made a point of saying how grateful she was to everyone who showed up, adding that for a lot of those fans, this was actually their very first tennis event ever, meaning her matches weren't just competitive drama. They were literally introducing an entire new audience to the sport itself. And if you think about that for a second, that's a kind of cultural bridge building that most athletes never get the chance to do. She wasn't just playing for ranking points. She was functionally expanding the fan base of an entire global sport, one match at a time. And she seemed to genuinely understand the weight of that role, admitting in interviews that the responsibility catches her off guard sometimes, that she has to consciously remind herself what she's carrying every time she steps onto a court. And that kind of self-awareness from someone still so young in her career is honestly rare. Most athletes at 21 are still figuring out their own game, let alone processing what it means to be a symbol for millions of people scattered across the globe. And here's where the story takes an even more emotional turn, because behind the scenes of practice sessions, something almost as remarkable was happening as the actual matches. Fans were lining up just to catch a glimpse of her training, camera phones raised, waiting patiently for even a few seconds of footage, watching her run drills alongside her coach, a respected figure who had come up through one of the sport's most prestigious academies. And while she worked on technical fundamentals, like footwork and shot placement, the crowd outside the practice courts kept growing, which tells you this wasn't just about match day excitement. This was sustained, dedicated fandom that showed up hours before competition even began, just for a chance to be near her. And if you've ever wondered what it looks like when an athlete transitions from being merely popular to becoming a full-blown cultural touchstone, that's basically the blueprint. It's not just filled stadiums during the big moments. It's people showing up for the mundane practice reps too, because proximity to her feels meaningful in itself. Then came the on-court interview after her big win. The moment that arguably did more to cement this phenomenon than the actual match result, because when asked what it felt like to suddenly be this popular internationally, she gave an answer that completely reframed the question, essentially saying that instead of asking what it's like to be this famous, people should be asking what it's like to be Filipino. And in that single moment, the crowd response was electric. Flags waved harder. The noise in the stadium spiked because she had taken a question about her personal fame and turned it outward, handing the moment back to the entire community rather than keeping it for herself. And that's a subtle but incredibly powerful move. It told every person in those stands that this wasn't about one athlete's individual stardom. It was about all of them collectively, and she closed that moment out with a heartfelt thank you in her native language directed straight at the crowd, which only intensified the emotional wave rolling through the arena. And if you were watching that clip online afterward, you could see exactly why it spread so fast. Because it wasn't scripted, it wasn't rehearsed. It was raw and genuine in a way that resonates far beyond sports commentary. It's also worth rewinding just slightly to something she posted before she even left for this tournament. A heartfelt message to her supporters back home as she prepared to travel, where she reflected on how deeply moved she'd been by the personal stories fans had shared with her, describing it as a reminder of exactly what she carries with her every time she competes, and calling it a genuine privilege to be part of something larger than her individual career, closing with a line about how proud she felt representing home. And when you connect that heartfelt private reflection to the massive public spectacle that followed in Washington just days later, you start to see the full arc of the story. This wasn't a one-off emotional outburst in an interview. This was a consistent, deeply held mindset she carries with her from tournament to tournament, match to match. And that consistency is part of why the connection with her fan base feels so authentic rather than manufactured for cameras. Even prominent figures within the tennis world took notice of what was unfolding, with one well-known former professional player publicly commenting that this looked like a genuine movement, a segment of tennis fandom that essentially didn't exist in any significant way just a couple years earlier. And that observation is honestly worth sitting with, because it means seasoned tennis insiders, people who have watched the sport for decades and seen plenty of rising stars come and go, recognized that what was happening here was structurally different. This wasn't the usual pattern of a talented player slowly building a following through years of steady results. This was something closer to a cultural ignition point, a moment where a community that had been quietly passionate for years suddenly found a unifying figure and rallied around her almost instantly and at massive scale. And once that kind of energy locks in, it tends to be self-sustaining, because every viral clip, every packed. Practice session. Every flag-waving celebration feeds into the next one, creating a snowball effect that traditional marketing or promotion simply cannot replicate. Back to the tournament chairman for a moment, because his comments throughout this whole saga revealed just how unprepared even the event organizers were for scale of what they tapped into. He kept circling back to her character in interviews, describing her as remarkably down-to-earth, humble, and genuinely appreciative. Not the kind of guarded or distant persona you sometimes get from athletes navigating sudden fame. And he framed her arrival as one of the most meaningful developments the tournament had experienced that entire year, which is a pretty striking statement when you remember this is an event that regularly hosts some of the most decorated names in the sport. And when reporters press him on why he thought this particular player had captured so much attention compared to established champions sharing the same draw, his answer kept coming back to the same core idea, that her following said something about a broader phenomenon rather than being purely about tennis. Talent. That Filipino communities exist all over the world, and she had become a unifying icon for an enormous, previously underrepresented fan base. And once you frame it that way, the ticket numbers stop being surprising and start making complete sense. Because this wasn't 80% of tennis fans suddenly deciding one player was more exciting than Grand Slam champions. It was an entirely new audience segment showing up specifically because of who she is and what she represents, essentially adding a whole new layer of demand on top of the tournament's usual base. When Eala reflected on the atmosphere afterward, she described being genuinely surprised, admitting this was her very first time competing in the city, and while she knew there was a Filipino community somewhere in the area, she had no real expectation of what that would translate into inside the stadium. So when she walked out and saw the scale of support waiting for her, it visibly caught her off guard, and she described the atmosphere on court that day as something electric, a word that kept coming up again and again from everyone involved, players, commentators, organizers, fans, all converging on that same description, because it genuinely captures what was happening. This wasn't the polite, reserved applause you typically associate with tennis crowds. This was closer to the kind of roaring, flag-waving energy you'd expect at a national team soccer match. And that contrast alone tells you how unusual this moment was within the sport's typically button-up culture. She also opened up about what it means to know that her performances carry weight far beyond her own personal results, explaining that representation itself is a powerful and meaningful thing. That seeing someone who looks like you, comes from where you come from, achieve something extraordinary can be deeply impactful in ways that are hard to fully articulate. And she made a point of saying that whether her fans are Filipino or from anywhere else in the world, when they connect with her story, they're often seeing a piece of themselves reflected back. And that universal framing is part of why her appeal has started spreading beyond just the Filipino diaspora too. Because at its core, this is a story about an underdog from a country not traditionally associated with elite tennis, clawing her way up against some of the most dominant names in the sport. And that narrative resonates with anyone who has ever felt like an outsider trying to break into a space that wasn't built with them in mind. So where does this all leave things going forward? Because if a single tournament in Washington could generate this level of demand, this level of raw emotional energy, purely off the back of one player's rise, it raises a genuinely fascinating question about what happens next. Does this kind of surge sustain itself as she continues climbing the rankings? Does it grow even larger as more people around the world discover her story? Or does it plateau once the novelty wears off? And honestly, based on everything described by people who were actually there, from the chairman's stunned commentary to the packed practice courts to that goosebump-inducing on-court interview, this doesn't feel like a passing trend. It feels like the early chapter of something much bigger, a genuine shift in who gets to be a tennis superstar and where that support comes from. And if that's true, then what happened in Washington wasn't just a great week for one athlete. It was a preview of a completely new era for the sport itself, one where passion and identity can pull just as much weight as trophies and rankings. And if you ask me, that's a far more interesting story than just another tournament bracket working itself out.